Good evening, folks. Welcome. We've got a hybrid situation going on tonight. I'm TC Owens, Vice President of Twin Tiers Five Rivers. I want to thank you all out. I know you drive a far way to be here, so good to see you. Welcome to our first event of the season. We've got a great speaker series coming up this fall. We've got Bill Kessler here this evening. Join us next month, first Monday of November. Greg Hefner will be doing a presentation on Carrie Stevens and the flies that she tied. And then in December, we'll have Jack Littleton here presenting on carp fishing. Check out our Facebook information or our Facebook page for the exact times. If you see something that you like this evening that you want to revisit, which I'm sure you likely will because Bill's got a wonderful presentation for us this evening, this will be uploaded to YouTube within the next couple of days for you to refer back to. And another important thing just to note, if you value these programs, we do all of our speaker series through, we do all the fundraising to pay speakers and do all the events that we do. Your membership fees go straight to the national FFI. We don't receive any of that revenue to do what we do. So if you feel like making a donation, it goes a long way, and it goes all back into the sport. So without further ado, I will kick it over to Bill. Bill and I have talked a bunch in preparation for his presentation tonight. He first did this presentation for the club a little bit over a decade ago and was reticent to do so because of that. And I said, well, I think that a decade's been long enough. And getting to work with him in making sure the slides run and everything. And it's just a wonderful presentation. And Bill's a really fantastic storyteller that's been Atlantic salmon fishing in many parts of Canada, in Russia, and points in between, as well as fishing for other species all over the world. So we're really lucky to have him as a club member, and even more fortunate to have him here presenting for us tonight. So without that, I'm going to turn this over to Bill.
Okay. Put this up here. Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to tie, if I've got time here, I will tie two flies. I don't use any of the traditional very complex feather wing flies. I fish hair wing flies most of the time. They're quicker to tie, they're very durable, and they catch fish just beautifully. What I'm going to tie here is a variation of a fly invented up on the Gaspe. It was originally tied using different colors. It's called a Picasse, and it's basically one that uses the colors of black and yellow. One of the things that happens up on my rivers is the fact that there's a lot of green used in some of the flies. And so what I've done is, rather than a Picasse, I invented one that I just call the Blueberry Picasse. And it uses both green and blue and some black. So at any rate, what I'm using here is an Alec Jackson heavy size 3 spey hook. And what I have here is a vinyl V-rib that I use basically as the body. And what I'm going to do is just tie that in. There's not even a tail on this fly. The body is this vinyl V-rib. And essentially, after we put that on, we just wrap the body. I'm doing this on a silver hook. I also do them on a black hook. And if I do, I underlay the body with silver tinsel so that the bright green shows up and doesn't get dulled by the color of the hook. Very simple to tie, but a very durable fly as well, and very effective.
So, Bill, when you say you're tying on a spey hook, is that the kind with where the hook eye wraps around and comes down the shank?
No, actually, I'm tying actually. Oh, I screwed this up here. It's a hook that is actually used for it's used for regular flies as well as speys, but it is often used for spey flies just because of its dimensions and configuration.
Got it.
And since this is a spey fly, what I'm using here with a feather is I'm using what were traditionally used in spey flies were heron. But of course, heron are not legal, certainly here in the US. So I'm using what everybody now uses as a substitute. This is a feather from a blue-eared pheasant. Has very much the configuration of that of heron. And I realized I did not bring my hackle pliers, which I usually use to handle this, but we'll do it without. And what I do is I tie this and fold it over so that it is heading back. So these fibers are always going back toward the hook. Okay. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in some Kingfisher Blue Arctic Fox. Adds a lot of movement and brightness to the fly. And along with the blue-eared pheasant, it adds movement. After that, I will put in some little bit of crystal flash. Okay, and then add the wing. Lots of times just plain black is used, but I like to use, this is Arctic fox tail, and some of these have got some white in them too. And I like to do that because it adds a little bit of complexity to it. Actually, lots of times as well, what I'm doing, I didn't bring, lots of times I will use cement as well when I put these in. When I got everything together, I forgot my hackle pliers and I forgot cement. Actually, I've got some UV stuff, but I don't even have a bodkin to put it on with. So we'll just trim this up here. Okay. And on top of that, I'll take part of a silver pheasant ahead of that. And that also adds the black and white at the front of the fly. There again, just a little bit more complexity. Oh, I should have brought my hackle pliers. Oh, pretty rough without the tools, but it is what it is today. And then I add jungle cockeyes, one on either side. Well, this is a pretty sloppy tie. This is, I'm tying at a completely different height than I do at home. This is much higher, and I don't have all the tools. And actually, this head is much, much too large, but it's green. That's part of the coloration of it. And basically, that's it. As I said, it's an extremely durable fly, and it has built-in movement. There's some good complexity to it, and the fish seem to like it too. Sure. And actually, from the timing here, it looks like I might not have enough time to tie the other fly, but I will explain it because it's a terrific fly that is very very effective, extremely simple to tie. And let me see, I think I have, yeah. It's one of the most effective flies and one of the simplest to tie. It's called a Sunray Shadow. Very simple fly. What it is, it's on a plastic tube, although I also tie these on aluminum tubes and on copper tubes as well. But the original was done on a plastic tube, and above the plastic tube, the first thing is some white bucktail. Then above that is the brown bucktail. And above that, the long black in the original was Columbus monkey. But people use all sorts of things in it now. What I do is I actually use human hair. There is, years ago, I found out in, when I was out in Oregon, there was a ladies' hairdresser shop that they sell human hair that, that women use in making up their hairdos. And it's perfect. Human hair just works beautifully. A friend of mine actually gets his from a local hairdresser, black hair from the Asian women. And he renamed the fly the Asian Persuasion, which is a great name. But Sunray Shadow is a terrific, terrific fly. The other thing that is nice about it as well, you can heat up a wire, the end of the wire, and put it through so that instead of the leader going through the end of the tube, it'll go up through the bottom, and then the fly will wake on the surface. And it's very, very effective. And what we do with these, let me see, I should have my hooks here someplace. The hooks, here are the hooks. At least on my Gaspe rivers, we're allowed to use double hooks, and normally what happens is the fact that the leader just goes through, you tie on these small hooks, small doubles, and you just put it into the tube. And And it's terrific when it does a number of great things. One is, since it's small hooks, the salmon don't have the leverage of a big hook swinging back and forth. These grip really, really well, whether they're singles or doubles. The other thing that is really good about them is the fact that as you're playing the fish, lots of times it pulls out and the fly doesn't get destroyed by the fish chomping on it. The fly might ride up the leader a bit, but he's hooked. And so that the tube flies last quite a bit longer because of that. And I'm a great believer in tube flies. As a matter of fact, this is something I wear around my neck. It is just a bunch of safety pins that I've got. It's a way to keep these flies organized without hooks. They just go onto the safety pins. So, any questions about any of the flies or?
So, I mean, when you're swinging a tube fly.
Yep.
I mean, does it often ride up the leader sometimes, or does it
No,
just
no, oh, no,
actually
no,
like
no,
the water
no, no, no,
really
no, no. It's only when you got something pull on it will it pull out. And lots of times, what happens with these plastic tubes, the hook will just go right in. But sometimes you're using bigger hooks, and then what happens is that a larger plastic tube will go over that to handle a larger fly. That happens too. They're very, very effective flies. I'm a great believer in tube flies. As I said, I love the fact that the fish doesn't have the leverage, and they hold really, really well.
Bill, can you actually put it in the vise for a minute? I just want to give folks a chance to see, like folks that are tuning in at home.
Okay.
See it close up. If you put it in the vise, I can show.
Okay, well, I'll have to put it in a strange way.
Yeah.
Because.
Right, it might slip out.
Yeah, normally what I do is this is my tube, my vise for the tube flies, and they fit right in here. There's just an adapter that goes into into any vise. And then this is topped then with on top of the human hair, then a few strands of peacock curl. And it's a classic Atlantic salmon fly that has been used for decades and decades and decades, all over the world. And as a matter of fact, I was in British Columbia a couple of weeks ago, fishing for steelhead, and it works on steelhead too, very well. Okay.
Yeah. Should we go to get to the
presentation?
Yeah.
Sure, of course. Very good. Yep.
And if you don't mind, I want to.
I'm here to tell you about my passion for Atlantic salmon. I've been told I'm a properly obsessed salmon fisher for over 30 years. My home rivers are in New Brunswick, Gaspe Peninsula in Canada, but I've also fished 250 miles north of the Arctic Circle in Russia, plus Scotland and Ireland. In a way, it makes no sense at all, especially when you can have many days of multiple catches of large lake-run rainbows and salmon in our Great Lake streams. It's unpredictable. Much of the time, you must reserve your fishing a year or more in advance, and the timing of the run, conditions, water levels, and temperatures can vary all over the place. Sometimes you can get a couple of dozen fish in a week, but you can also fish an entire week without even getting a pull. And sometimes you can be completely flooded out. And yes, it can be pretty expensive. There's a limited amount of water and lots of demand. Lodges might cost $8,000 to $15,000 a week and up. The Karlovka in northern Russia, where I have fished before, the prices before Ukraine for a week in prime season was $22,500 for 1 week. So on your own, of course, you can do it for probably as little as $3,000 with a guide, and if you find a place to stay and cook for yourselves. But these are very special fish. They will come to a dead drift dry fly like trout. They're returning to the rivers where they've evolved for over tens of thousands of years. And these fish are not transplanted aliens. They're home. A real affirmation of the natural world. And they're spectacular fish in spectacular settings. This is the East Litsa on the Kola Peninsula in Russia, Norway, the Mörrum in Sweden, Tweed in Scotland, beautiful rivers in Iceland, the Marguerite on Cape Breton, Quebec, New Brunswick, and my beloved crystal clear rivers on the Gaspe Peninsula. This is the Bonaventure, where underwater visibility has been measured at more than 100 feet. This passion for the king of fish has been with us for a very long time. We can fish for them because they return from the sea to their natal streams with one purpose: to reproduce. They've traveled many thousands of miles to reach their destination after their time at sea. For some, it'll be their first time. Some may return to spawn multiple times. Typical spawning occurs from late October to December. This is third waterfall on the Karlovka River in Russia. This is also third waterfall, 28 kilometers above the sea. In the late 1990s, British industrialist Peter Power managed a 50-year lease on 2 million acres of northern Russia that contained 4 of the finest Atlantic salmon rivers in the world, from source to the sea. In 2003, it was named the Atlantic Salmon Reserve. In 2002, I was part of a small group whose assignment was to explore the fishery above first waterfall, which was only 8 kilometers above the sea, which was all they had normally fished. Back to our salmon. Once they reach the spawning grounds, when the timing is right, the hen digs a redd and spawning commences. Males compete to fertilize the eggs. She will deposit approximately 700 eggs per pound of her weight. That's 14,000 eggs for a 20-pound hen. And somewhere between 60 and 160 days, typically March or April, the eggs hatch as alevin, fry. The egg sac nourishes the fry for a couple of months. Then in early summer, at about 2.5 inches, the salmon, now a par, emerges from the gravel and begins to feed. The distinctive par marks serve as part of their camouflage. The par might spend as much as 8 years in fresh water. 5 is about average. Surprisingly, as early as 2 to 5 years of age, some of these little males can become sexually mature and can actually fertilize a mature hen's eggs. These little guys. Hens typically won't become sexually mature until they've spent 2 or more years at sea. At the end of his last growing season, he undergoes a process called smodification. His caudal and pectoral fins become black. He becomes more streamlined and silver. At the cellular level, he undergoes a transformation that allows him to transition to salt water. Migration to the sea typically happens at night, April and May, but can be later in northern rivers. Curiously, he heads to sea tail first. This map shows the major migration routes at sea. Our smolts from Canada typically head to the Grand Banks, then later further north, to the rich feeding grounds of the Davis Strait and along the coast of Greenland, along with many European salmon. Their diet progresses in size as they do, heavy in lipids, krill, capelin, candlefish, and so forth. There are said to be magnetic particles in the salmon's lateral line that allows him to orient to the Earth's magnetic field. Think of it as his onboard compass. He also has a pineal window, a covering on the top of his cranium that transmits information to his pineal organ. It gives him the capability to detect polarized light. And since polarized light can even penetrate clouds, it helps him know the exact location of the sun, even under fog and gray skies. As he travels primarily in daylight, it's his primary navigation tool, his sextant, if you will. Additionally, the amount and duration of daylight gives him an accurate measure of the time of the year. So in essence, he has an onboard calendar. The food supply, currents in his onboard navigation system guides his feeding and his eventual return to his natal territory. He travels right along the coast until he finally detects the chemical signature of his natal river. Salmon will enter their rivers from February through December, but mostly May to October. A lot of these salmon will return and spawn to the exact part of the river where they were originally hatched. This is a grilse, which is typically male. He spent one winter at sea. SW signifies sea winter, the number of years that salmon overwinter at sea. And they're typically 4 to 6 pounds. After 2 years at sea is when most hens become sexually mature and return to the rivers. Typically, 2 sea winter fish are between 7 and 18 pounds, but in some systems and years, they could be as large as 20 pounds. Some 3 sea winter salmon might be returning for the first time, but some might be repeat spawners. 4 sea winter salmon can easily be over 30 pounds. Some salmon might grow to be 20 years old and over 50 pounds. This is the Grand Cascapedia in Gaspe. If you're familiar with steelhead and lake run rainbows, Atlantic salmon act very much the same, as they'll hold in 2 to 4 mile an hour water. But the salmon might like slightly deeper waters. Historically, salmon have been fished with wet flies. This is actually a Picasse in the colors of it, normal. Generally, cast are downstream at about 45 degrees and can vary a lot depending on the nature and the speed of the water and how the angler might want to fish that particular piece of water. Generally, cast are downstream. This illustration shows how an angler can methodically and completely cover a piece of water by casting, letting it swing, then taking a couple of steps and casting again. You just cover the area to see if you can find fish. If he wants to adjust the speed the fly swings, he might mend the line upstream to slow its speed or downstream to speed it up. A mend is performed after the line's on the surface of the water. Or he might use a reach cast, which is manipulated and cast before it's on the water. An interesting note here, steelhead fishers generally like a slow swing. Salmon fishers do as well, but there are times when salmon really respond to a faster swing, sometimes even fast strips. This is an upstream mend there. Wet fly swings, there's a natural swing. Typically, a presentation is with a natural swing. At times, twitching the fly can bring a reluctant fish to the fly. And sometimes, especially as the fly enters slower water, stripping the fly will do the trick. There are many types of takes. There will just be a pull, a solid stop. I have my drag set fairly low with a line coming directly off the reel, my finger touching the line for the feel of a take, and I just tighten and lift. Sometimes the take can be much more dramatic. With a low drag set and the feel of the line, you can avoid being broken off. My reaction, generally press the line to the cork with a finger and lift. Sometimes you'll just get a light tap, like your fly has just touched a blade of grass. You wait, see if it tightens with the weight as the fish turns. If not, you wait a little bit, go back to it with another cast. An example of that is with a tiny fly. One morning on the Karlovka, we were told, have your equipment together before breakfast, and we helicoptered over to Peter's camp on the Rinda for breakfast. That day, 4 of us fished the Rinda in the morning with Peter and Gordon Sim, his director of fishing. At lunch, we flew over to a small pool on the Zolotaya, small, almost Spring Creek-sized river. We were told, you must catch a salmon before you can cook your steak, and each of us had to use this same tiny size 14 fly, as 14 Irish shrimp in this pool. Okay, oldest first. Gordon tells Larry where to cast. And within 2 casts, he was fast to a fish. He bows to the jumping fish like the tarpon fisherman he is. I was up next. It's a par. My blade of grass light tap. No, Gordon said, that's a salmon. Next cast, I got my salmon. Larry, me, Bob, all successful. Here we are cooking our steaks. Gordon is back there with Tom fishing. Here are Gordon, Tom, Larry, Bob, Peter. I was taking the picture. 6 anglers, 6 steaks, all on a single size 14 fly. Then we fished the rest of the day elsewhere on the river. This is a bomber, which is undoubtedly the most widely fished dry fly. On several of the incredibly clear rivers on the Gaspe, many times we're fishing dead drift dries to sighted fish. There are really 6 fish in that in that picture. Depending on the depth of the water, typically we'll land the fly 2 to 3 above the fish. And if he doesn't take it, it drifts over it, then we'll pick up and cast again. This is just sort of typical. Nope. I came up and come for it, but nope, he didn't take it. This time he did. And these can just be spectacular fish. Dead drift takes. There are many types of dead drift takes. If he just comes up behind it or he slashes at it, he's a candidate. Sometimes he'll just take it straight forward, and sometimes he'll chase it. And sometimes it's a subtle take, like a trout sipping a midge. And sometimes it can be pretty dramatic. Let me tell you about some memorable dry fly takes that happened to me. One time, fishing a dead drift dry on the Bonaventure to a sighted fish in high water, I passed the fly over him a couple of times. Next time, he slapped the fly with his tail. A couple more casts and he came up and he just bumped it with the top of his head. A couple more casts and he bumped it with his nose. Next time he came up and he knocked the fly about 3 feet in the air, and he took it 3 feet in the air, fully out of the water, his tail just barely touching the water. Landed him, he was a 10-pound male. Randy Widener was with me in the boat. The guide was looking elsewhere and didn't see the take. But Randy said, I said to Randy, did you see that? He said, yes, but did you hear that? He said, I heard him slap his mouth closed on that fly. I didn't hear that, but Randy said he did. Another time on the Petite Cascapedi, I see this nice fish in about 6 feet of water. So I said, these are very, very clear rivers. When I passed the fly over him, you could see him quicken a bit. You could see him moves his fin just a little, almost like you could see him thinking. Next cast, he rose up from the bottom just a couple of inches. And then he went back down. A few more casts, and he came up maybe about halfway. And slowly went back down again. A few more casts, and then he came up just underneath the fly with his nose just about on it. And he drifted back vertically with it for about 6 or 8 feet. And then he just sucked it in like a trout sipping a midge. Finally landed. He was a beautiful 25-pound male. And sometimes it takes many drifts before a fish will take. Fishing with Renee had many drifts over this fish. Renee said, let me go get another fly. She's just not interested. The fish took right after he turned back to get another fly, and I replied, okay, but first let me remove this fly from her mouth. He never saw the take. At 28 pounds, she was the largest fish I've taken on a dead drift dry fly. My largest on a waked fly is 32 pounds. These are flies that leave a wake on the surface when they're swung. First encountered by Lee Wolf in the 30s while fishing Portland Creek in Newfoundland, he noticed the local fishermen did well with wet flies that waked in the surface. They did this by tying a couple of half hitches around the shank at the head. Lee eventually named it the Portland hitch. This is a small plastic tube fly with a leader coming out of the side to make it wake. This little fly with a tiny size 10 double hook took the largest fish one week when I was in Russia. She was 44 pounds with a size 10 and a fly that's only about that long. When fishing wakes, you adjust the casting angle depending on the speed and the complexity of the current. And as you can see, it can be a pretty exciting way to fish.
Bill, can I ask a question?
Sure.
So when you're fishing in conditions that are this clear, are these fish, how weary are these fish?
It depends. They can be very wary. Here, the third time, the fly went under, but we got the fish this time. Yeah, the fish in super clear water, they can be very touchy. But sometimes they surprise you. Sometimes they really surprise you. But yeah, lots of times they can be cast over time and time and time again, as long as there isn't a lot of disturbance. Disturbance to the water, unnatural disturbance to the water can put them down and put them off. Well, as you can see, it's a pretty exciting way to fish. And when it comes to setting the hook, it depends. Much of the time the fish does it, it's automatic, especially with a wet fly and a hitch fly. First-time trout fishermen will often strike as soon as they see movement to a dead drift dry fly, and they take the fly away from the fish. You should wait for the fly to disappear. When asked, expert Canadian dry fly fisher Mike Crosby just says you wait until he wraps his lips around the fly. The British have long felt that when a fish takes, you just say, God save the Queen. That's enough of a delay for the fish to take, turn, and be well hooked. This can especially be true in the fall as spawning approaches. Males develop kypes, that hook, and they can't completely close their mouths. You wait for the fish to turn before setting the hook. Speaking of which, and Mike Crosby, Mike's caught over 2,000 salmon, mostly on dry flies. One time he was invited to fish one of the great camps on the Restigouche. Like many camps, they fish in the morning, take an afternoon break, and then fish in the evening. Mike was there to fish, so he went over to the guide's cabin and told his guide he'd like to continue to fish, he'd pay him extra, and they both could fish. As usual, Mike was fishing a bomber when he saw this big shape come up beneath his fly and go back down. Whoa! A couple of casts later, the fish rose and took the fly. Mike tightened, and there was nothing. He couldn't believe it. A few casts later, the fish rose and took the fly again. He waited a little longer and set the hook. Nothing again. Wow. And Mike's a very skilled fly fisher. Okay, let's tie a different fly. So he sat down to change his fly when his guide got up and started stripping line off his reel. Mike said, Stephen, how old are you? With a puzzled look on his face, he replied, 23. Mike assured them if he wanted to see 24, he should sit down. This was his fish. And finally, on the third take, the fish was hooked, and after a long fight, including pulling the anchor to follow the fish, they finally landed him. And as you can see, what a fish. New Brunswick Department of Fisheries estimated its weight at 63 pounds after measuring his length by counting the ribs in the canoe. They carefully released the fish, and if they had kept it, it undoubtedly would count as the North American record. With this huge kype, you can see why the fish was so difficult to hook. And you can even see Mike's bombers there in the canoe. As far as equipment goes, I use my single-handed rod primarily for dry fly work, but many people fish them all the time, including Mike, who landed that fish using his single-handed rod. Switch rods are lightweight, and they offer the flexibility of using both single or double-handed casts. Double-handed rods give you some great options. You can fish them overhead casting or spey casting. They give you a lot of benefits, especially with line control and mending. There are many kinds of spey casts, but they always have these two things in common. The back cast is always under the rod tip, unlike overhead casts. And there's an anchor where the line touches the water before the forward cast. The advantages include casting where there's little or no room for back casts. You have great line control, and they're much less tiring than fishing a single-handed all day long. They really are much more relaxing, and they can give you great distance. Traditional casts using mid and long belly lines use a kiss-and-go anchor, that is where the line briefly touches the water. There's very little stripping as the angler is usually casting the length of line that he's fishing. For even longer casts, you can shoot line. So you might start out fishing 30 feet of line, then you go further, then you go further, you go further. And with long lines, you can actually even pick up, with the right technique, you can pick up 90 feet of line and recast it all into single motion. And if you need to go longer than that, you can strip out more and shoot line. The advantage is there's no stripping. Flies in the water most of the time. You cast, drift, take a couple of steps and cast. The distance, the current record is 230 feet. My longest cast ever was 140. But these competitive guys are amazing. The disadvantage for using these long and mid belly lines is in heavy winds and for fishing short. And the length of the rod, it's not good in short rods. But this is traditional with a kiss and go anchor. These are traditional casts. And you can see he's fishing a very long line without even stripping. Scandinavian casts use shooting heads, followed by a running line. Scandi casts also use a very brief kiss and go anchor, but here you must strip the line until you reach the head, because that's what you're always casting. You're always casting the same length of line, you just add distance by shooting. The advantage is you can fish short and somewhat long. When you have very little room for back casts, there's very light disturbance. They're pretty darn good in wind, and they have great flexibility. Leaders can actually be 15 to 20 feet in length. And these are Scandi casts. And as you can see, after he casts, he has to strip back in till he reaches the head, which is normally between 24 and 30 feet. Some of the longer casts can be, some of the longer heads can be 38. Skagit casts are heavy, short, heads, 23 feet and up. There's always running line behind that. It's called a sustained water anchor. So the line stays on the water a longer time than just kiss and go. And you have to strip and shoot. They use these heavy shooting heads developed in the Pacific Northwest for fishing heavy flies, heavy sink tips for winter steelhead. Good in wind, but sometimes more splashy presentations. This is a Skagit cast. You can see the line is on the water for that anchor for a very long time. But here again, you have to strip back to the head.
Bill, if somebody wanted to learn the two-handed casting styles, where would you recommend? What are the 3 styles would you recommend to start with?
It's very interesting. If you want to become a really proficient spey caster, you start with the most difficult, which is medium to longer length. If you want to start fishing right now, you use a Skagit. Skagits are with the sustained water anchor where it's on the water for a long time. Somebody can be fishing very quickly. But to really learn all of the techniques and really get a good feel between your feel of the line, your feel of the rod, more traditional casts are really what's needed. You don't have to do all of that with Skagit casts. Once you're good at all the rest of it, your Skagit casts can get much better. But yeah, lots of learning started with Skagit casts. But when I teach people traditional. Yeah. We use all kinds of flies. We use many styles and sizes of wet flies, from tiny ones to flies over 4 inches. I've caught salmon on size 12 flies. Tube flies offer a number of advantages. One great advantage is using these small hooks that hold really well, especially beneficial as large hooks. Large flies and conventional hooks can work loose as the fish gains leverage as it goes back and forth, swings back and forth. These are various dead drift dry flies and different kinds of wakers using both conventional hooks and tube flies. Let me tell you about some of my rivers on a couple of different continents. This is New Brunswick in Canada. All non-residents must have a guide. No weight is allowed to be added. The Miramichi is home to the largest Atlantic salmon run in North America. Last year, I fished Hall of Famer Ted Williams' camp. Stayed at his camp. The Nepeziquit, up north of that, has been my main New Brunswick river for over 30 years, and most of that water is private. The V at the top is the Bay of Chaleur. There are no outfitters on the entire river, but most of it is not very accessible. The water we fish has been in the Gray family for many generations. This is an illustration of William Gray in the 30s with a sport fisher fishing lower middle pool, looking upstream. Looking downstream, this is William's grandson, Ken Gray, who will be 90 next month, with my buddy Randy Widener, nearly on the same rock as the previous illustrations, 75 years later, looking downstream. Randy fishing middle pool just above lower middle, which is really the best pool in the river. The head of middle pool, camp pool is up above. Notice that triangular rock there in the center. There's the same rock. Larry's fishing middle pool. It's the best pool. The rock in the center and the white water on the right, it will just show you right there. It drops off 3 feet there. There's a big drop. That guard rocks the chute. If a fish heads downstream here, a long 2-handed rod makes it easy negotiating that rock. We had been seeing fish all day in middle pool because they'd come up in porpoise. Sometimes they'd jump and so nobody could connect with anything. I had that pool one afternoon and evening. And I said, oh, I think I'll try a sink tip. And all of a sudden I started connecting. 9 fish that evening, from size 10 flies to flies that were 4 inches long, all from that same pool. Wow. Next day, everybody was using sink tips in that pool. This is Upper Camp Pool, just above all of that. Several years ago, we arrived in mid-afternoon on a Sunday, and it rained a little bit that evening. Water was coming up a little bit. Well, when I woke up in the morning, I could hear the river. That's how far the river came up. That's the same, that rock over at the left there is that, whoops, oh no, I'm sorry, I meant to go backwards. Holy cow, why am I not going backwards? There we are. That big rock there is that big rock there. It came up that. So Larry and I turned around and drove home. You know, the river was gone for the rest of the week. This is the Gaspe Peninsula in Quebec. It's just below the St. Lawrence, where the St. Lawrence flows to the sea. At the top of the that V at the bottom is New Brunswick, and where the Nipisiguit comes in, that's the Bay of Chaleur, right below the peninsula. Flies with added weight are also prohibited here. All of this water is controlled, both in limited sectors assigned by lottery and in open sectors, but you're controlled. You have to pay a fee in order to fish it. But as you can see, they're beautiful rivers. We walk into some areas to fish, but we also use these 26-foot canoes, sometimes with a motor, sometimes without a motor at all, and it's just poled downstream. Sometimes they're just used to get around, and sometimes we fish from the canoe. Up. Gonna go back. And Steve, one of my favorite guides, with the celebratory drink after that fish. But we also wade. Many of you might know Ray Grandner. He was with me for his first time ever salmon fishing. And as you know, he's made some of the finest fish reproductions ever. This is a full 360-degree reproduction that matches that fish that he caught. That was on the Bonaventure. Friend John with a lovely 30-pound hen from the Petite Cascapedia. This is salmon fork on the Grand Cascapedia. Here, John hooked a fish that went under the bridge. Deep water just downstream, so the guide helped him over those rocks to the other side. He finally landed this lovely 17-pound hen. My buddy Bob, fishing below me, just hooked a fish, and I thought to grab my camera. Seemed like a good fish, and then the fish just headed downriver and really started going. Bob and the guide in pursuit as the fish just built up speed. And when they got to this boulder, the guide went around one side and Bob the other. With the fish still on, Bob soaking wet, the run continued. Finally, after about 450 yards downriver, he landed this lovely bright hen about 40 miles up from the salt water. After that, I went back where I was fishing and took this hen on a waker. We had a great day. This is the Kola Peninsula in Russia. That's the Atlantic Salmon Reserve at the top, the Rinda, Zolotaya, Karlovka, and the East Litsa. These are rugged, wild, powerful rivers. And we fished all 4 of the rivers, and this is how we got around on the Kola. This is the East Litsa, obviously a long, steep hike down to the river. It's a big rock pool. When Peter fished it, he didn't walk down. He had his pilot land the helicopter on the rock. Obviously a beautiful pool, very deep immediately. You can see an inflatable raft just upriver that we used for crossing. My largest from the pool was 27 pounds. My friend Larry fishing on the other side. A lovely heavy fish. And you can see it's a beautiful remote place. This is returning to camp on the Karlovka. Some additional shots of the Karlovka, where we also caught resident brown trout up to 8 pounds, 9 pounds. Beautiful, beautiful river. It's a wild, beautiful place. Another sequence with Bob, this time on the East Litsa. He had hooked a fish on the other side of the river, and Volodya said, "You'll never land it on that side." So they jumped, sort of, into the raft to come to my side. As you can see, he's barely in. And the fish just keeps going and going. They finally get to this side, but the fish just keeps going. And he lost it. In the end, we obviously don't lose them all. And wherever we are, these are exciting, beautiful fish that we carefully release so that they can continue on their journey to complete their natural cycle and return again and again. That's it. Any questions?
Are the barbs crushed?
The barbs are generally crushed on big hooks, but not always. It's not a requirement. And the barbs on the small hooks are so tiny, they come out very, very easily. But lots of times, like there are times that I will just consciously crush my barbs, but with the tiny flies, usually I don't. They really come out easily.
Where did you fish in BC?
The lower, this time, the lower Skeena at Terrace. Yeah. And it was if the people might know that the runs in BC are off quite a bit this year. I only landed 2 steelhead for the week, but I landed quite a few beautiful chrome cohos. I landed pinks. I landed 2 dog salmon, what? Chums, right. I landed 2 silver bright sockeyes. I mean, they hadn't started to turn color. They were, I mean, everything was running really, really late. In order to, I missed a grand slam because I didn't catch any Chinook, but it was great. But one of those steelhead that I had was probably the most spectacular steelhead that I've ever hooked into at, she was mid to upper teens. She was the toughest damn fish that I've ever caught. And she was in the air more times than she was in the water. She cartwheeling. As soon as she hit the water, she was up again. She was so bright. There wasn't even a hint of pink on her cheeks. She just wanted to go right back to the salt water. spectacular fish. But yeah, the runs this year are way down.
Thank you.
Certainly, my pleasure.
I have a
Believe-
question about
Sure.
two-handed casting.
Yep.
Where do you practice around here?
Just below the bridge on
Yeah.
the Shimon,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. I have practiced. Yeah, I practiced there, no problem.
Yeah.
And yeah, I did that for a long time. And as a matter of fact, I would even at times set up my camera on a tripod so that I could watch it, so that then I could analyze my casts as well. And I could see what I was doing wrong and see what I needed to do to improve it and so forth. It's very interesting. When I started it, I started spey casting, two-handed casting, on the Nipisquit in New Brunswick, where I fished for many years. And as I was casting, it was just absolutely terrible. You know, because I could put my fly anywhere I wanted in my sleep single-handedly. And it just occurred to me, in my hands, this is not a precision instrument. And so the more I learned, it finally got to the point where I got good enough. But boy, it was really, really awkward. Also very interesting. Friends, my friend John, who had that lovely 30-pound fish on the on a waked fly, he and his wife invited my wife and me to see if we wanted to take a 3-day float on the Deschutes in Oregon. And my wife is 5 feet tall, soaking wet. She might weigh 95 pounds. I put her in the backyard, and she fishes a 4-weight rod on spring creeks. That's all she'd ever fished. I put her in the backyard with my 10-foot 8-weight single-hander, see if she could cast it. Oh, no, too big. She said, "What about one of your spey rods?" Well, she did fine. She caught her first steelhead using a two-handed spey rod on the Deschutes. So it really is so much gentler on the body. It really is. You can fish it all day long.
I have a question about leaders.
Yep.
So you were mentioning that you can use a leader, you can run a leader that's upwards of 20 feet.
Yep, that's primarily with touch and go casting, with long bellies and with scandies. When you're fishing skagits, lots of times you're fishing 5-6 foot leaders because you're fishing well below the surface most of the times. Most of the time when I'm fishing scandy and long bellies, I'm fishing scandy now more than anything, just because of the flexibility. I can do long casts with it, and it's so much better in wind than relying on the long belly lines. There, I normally will fish 15-foot leaders. And the rods that I'm using are, I have a 13-foot 3, a 13-foot 4, 13.3 is an 8-weight, 13-foot 4 is a 7-weight. That's the one I use most of the time. I have a 13.9 8-weight. I also have a 15-foot 9-weight that I haven't fished in years. Too big, you don't need it. But yeah, the 13-foot 4 7-weight scandy, I've caught 30, 32, 34-pound fish on that rod without a problem.
And then are the leaders, do you build those by hand?
I do.
Yeah.
Some people, it's very interesting because some fishers will use a solid leader not even tapered,
Yeah, I was wondering about that.
the whole damn length. I can't do that. I like the dynamics of turnover by making my own. I just think that they fish better. But yeah, people all over the place. But yeah, so I build my leaders. And normally what I do is I build them mostly out of monofilament, but then the tippets I'm always using fluoro. And my tippets are usually about that long.
And your tippets are what, around like 1x, 0?
I don't go by X, I go by diameter. I normally am fishing 12 thousandths. And with some, it depends on who manufactures it, it'll be different pound weights and different X sizes and so forth, but 12 thousandths, sometimes I'll use 13 thousandths. Yep.
Other questions, Bill? Folks on the chat, any questions? I have one more that I want to ask. How'd you get started?
How did I get started? Fishing?
How'd you get started Atlantic salmon fishing?
How did I get started Atlantic salmon fishing? Well, it was always, I had been a steelhead fisherman. My home steelhead river is the North Umpqua in Oregon. And Atlantic salmon, of course, has just got a tremendous attraction to it. It's like a lot of people think that it's really the king of fish. It was Ted Williams' favorite fish, along with bonefish and tarpon. But Atlantic salmon was his favorite. Plus the fact that it's got great long history. And so that got me interested. And it was actually, I introduced my friend Larry to steelhead fishing on the Umpqua, and he had fished Atlantic salmon before in New Brunswick. And so he said, let's do Atlantic salmon. So I went with him. And so I first started on the Nipisiguit, where I fished for so many years with the Gray family. So that's where I actually started. But since then, I've fished in Ireland and Scotland and Russia, and it's just great stuff. And I fished in New Brunswick and a number of rivers in Quebec. But this type of fishing also took me to other places like Tierra del Fuego, where I fished for those huge sea-run brown trout. Just spectacular fish. Similar, but I still think my favorite's Atlantic salmon. I love the fish. And they're beautiful. They're just, especially because when we're fishing them, we fish them when they're fresh, just coming in from the sea. We fish them primarily in June when they're right out of the salt. I've also fished them later in the year when they're more colored up, but I love those aggressive, fat, feisty, right from the salt fish. So. Good.
Cool. Any other questions?
I do have some other flies here if people want to see some of my other flies. If not, sure. I have not fished any rivers in Maine. There are a couple now that are just starting to come back. But no, I have not. I don't know that I don't know that it's living this far away, a trip there when the runs are so sparse. I don't know that it would be worth the trip. If I lived closer, yeah, maybe I would. If it's an easy trip, but no, I haven't fished any of them. And I actually and for that type of fishing, I really don't fish our New York rivers for lake run rainbows and salmon and so forth. It doesn't interest me as much. You go out and won't come back in. Oh, right. But there's aesthetics. I had a career as a designer, and aesthetics are a very important part of my life. And so I love the beauty of the places that I go, and it's just part of it because I have limited time that I can do it. As a matter of fact, my travel in the last couple of years has been curtailed considerably now because my wife isn't in great shape. She doesn't walk well. And as a matter of fact, when I was in the Gaspe this June, my daughter, who lives in Portland, Oregon, flew to be with my wife for the whole week, the 10 days that I was gone. When I was in BC, she flew all the way here to be with my wife. So, so my travel time is very limited from what it used to be.
How are the numbers in the rivers for helping it? Staying the same in the past 30 years?
No. 30 years ago, it was probably better. Then there were declines, and they were the Atlantic Salmon Federation. I don't know if it was the Atlantic Salmon. Well, at any rate, the fisheries in Greenland were taking enormous tons of Atlantic salmon. And so those fishers were bought out so that they could only land a certain tonnage of fish. And all of a sudden, our numbers started to go back up again. First Nations in Canada as well, they net tons and tons of fish. There again, a lot of their fisheries were bought out to limit their fishing and so forth. And so we saw our numbers start to rise again. Generally speaking, it's holding on pretty well now. It really is. But environmental conditions change. Logging can have a terrible effect. But all in all, I think the Atlantic salmon, our Atlantic salmon in Canada are doing better. They're not fantastic numbers, but they're doing better. It's been a long time since. I think I probably only remember only 1 year on the Gaspe that I didn't land a fish. There were another year I know only landed one, but if I land a fish a day, I'm happy. I, as well as most people, will limit themselves to 2 landed fish a day. And we always fish no kill. You can still, on some rivers, you can still buy a kill license. And if you do, and that includes killing some of these monsters, which is just awful because they're the ones those are the big spawners that we want their genetics. But some people still will kill fish. You kill a fish, that's it for the day. And I think you're probably limited, I don't know, you might be limited to 1 kill a year. I don't really know. Yeah, I always fish no kill. And the licenses are much cheaper. A license on the Gaspe for no kill is $40 a year. In New Brunswick, it's 110, yeah, so it's generally a no kill.
Thank you.
Good.
Bill.
Sure.
Thank you, Bill.
Yep. And as I say, if anybody wants to see some flies, I've got some flies. Other flies. I can find out how to.
Do you want me to help you?
Yep, I got it.
Cool.
Okay, let me see what I got.
All right, folks, thanks for tuning in
Yeah, why don't you-
via Zoom. We'll be back next month. Sorry for the technical difficulties.
Here's a dead brick flies.